Welcome to The Point of View. This is your favorite current affairs show on television. On The Point of View, we pick the right topics, we get the right guests, ask them relevant questions on issues that matter to you. But every now and again, we pause, think through something important that's going on, and we editorialize. We give you the facts, we give you the angles, and we analyze what is going on. And tonight is a special night because prices of food have been going through the roof, not just in Ghana, but globally. We'll try and give you some of the insights behind those figures and tell you why we should be concerned and why something drastic needs to be done, both locally and globally, to address these challenges. Stay with us.
Bell Beverages just made 20.
So tonight I'll be looking at why food prices have been going up. I'll show you the extent of increase in food prices for a number of our staples. I'll then relate what's happening globally to it. How much of the increase in food prices we see in Ghana has been occasioned by Ukraine conflict or the Russian conflict with Ukraine? How much of this is an African phenomenon? And which of these things have been caused by our own bad policy implementation? I would also look at some proposed solutions as we think through a very important subject. But to start with, I'm going to show you a few price trends. So for example, maize, if you compare last year to this year, there have been some fundamental increases. If you look at the screen right now, you would notice that maize prices have increased in multiple markets between March 2021 and April 2022. Indeed, these figures are from Isoko. It's quite clear that commodity prices have been going up in the country. So for example, a 100 kg sack of maize, which in 2021 was going for 200 cedis, is now going for 292, almost a 100 cedi increase. If you look, and this is January to January comparison, if you take February to February as well, 292 in the previous month, it increased by a significant figure. The same happened in March and April. Now, if we look at the issue of prices in specific markets, so for example, yam, if you take yam, tubers of yam, 250 tubers in Techiman market, 800 cedis January last year, 1,000 cedis January this year. 600 cedis March last year, 1,000 cedis March this year. And if you came to April as well, look at the increase, 800 to 1,000. So it's not just maize, yam is also going up. Look at things like tomatoes, right? So you have a 72 kilogram crate of tomatoes, 500 in January last year, as of January, 1,200. March, 600 to 900. So some of these months are seasonality based. Generally, in Ghana, our planting season starts around April and goes on till about May. We usually harvest in August. So some of these price movements are seasonal in nature. So those are just a few examples of price increases. I'll touch on local price increases later on in the show. But to start off, we've been speaking to some people you encounter daily. Kofi Brookman is something we buy regularly. Roasted plantain. Vivian Kaloko a few days ago was on Lagos Avenue and spoke to a seller of roasted plantain on price behavior based on their own recollection. This is what ensued.
See a plantain, no. What on our hand war markets, no.
Patch on market, you know, 520 or
5. Nah, 20 cities.
And a 420. The young Kumaka crana ya 10 cedi.
Okay. It's depending on the size, no.
Yes.
Now this year, no, Obia can say prices are caught up. They don't say most of those are. They now can say leading to prices on caught up. Or plantain, a year
where the plantain are costro and take away near mana to turning in our beginning near many in our costro. Until now, my plantain on some price in our costro.
Okay. Now all they are no plantain no to our info.
Market, domain
market. Until January say na and now no 20 cities for 4 no depending on size no.
eno enso bia sa de ba me fan say no mu yedu kakra ne size ni mu yedu. Yes.
Now last year no December honum na auto no saying.
Last year na ye 3 10 cedi. But na ye na take away ni niam na price ni wo fam kakla se na nei.
Take away ni ye den. Then na mo can take rubber no okay.
Yes.
O profits no akọ up and now reduce it.
Abi e wo fam aba fam kala anti se first no. Because first na niam na price ni wo fam ba na say die akosoro. But it niam na nyina fam lolo fe on se ato petrol. Car na wo de be free ho na wo de niam kakra bi be ba na wo 50 Ghana from market ba. Ti ano no ma wo titi sa niam na nyina free mu a. Kakla bi. Na nka ti o lo nka ye 36. As first na nka nti sa 25 cedi. Say ni atum kala akosoro.
36 for Olonka.
Yes, 36.
So that was Vivian Kailoko speaking to a coffee Brookman seller on Lagos Avenue. She's not happy with the price increases. But it's not just coffee Brookman. Another major food that we buy is kenke. Vivian Kailoko's report was from East Legon, which is relatively posh. Akosia Otri went to Accra Central, Gamashi, to interact with kenke sellers on the price of kenke. Here's what she came through with.
I have come to Jamestown in Accra. On this stretch, I could count more than 10 kenke houses. I understand these are hubs where individuals come to buy in bulk. This could be the right place to ask some of the traders why there has been a constant increase in the price of kenke.
Why am I 450? Be an extra me 450. One more in a camp. Nyenu I connected 750,000. Nyenu 760. One sister bring a cock when a man say, eh, equal about tuning. Banen were on, I on a be an about 10 cedi.
Well, last year, to Moneke, no me
no why 15, why 35.
last year, to maybe. She this year, no,
This year, no, they take when giddy na kae. This year, potential, no, I last 2 weeks, near 75, near 55.
2 weeks ago, he 750. This week, 80.
Near here, in 85, 75.
Yeah, na hey. I believe it to me. Uchifonchi agma believe. Uchifonchi. Beno senish kana sanake jatwa baba ke pakwa ba lodu pa. Aye pakwa ba lodu ahun beno ba na ka twa baba ke ba ke I believe jala neke besa no so ke shika konkloko asename.
These traders have vowed to increase the prices higher if the situation does not change.
Shina na believe ya 6 million. Wo come here na no 3 cedi ke 2 cedi epo. Wo ba kpabo. Na ne 1 4 ke 5.
Consumers are also bearing the brunt of the increase in prices.
Vraiment, anyway, yole. I wait 1 cedi. Neighbor 5,000. Abone
50 pesos.
50 pesos. Abone me ne I get 3 cedi. E mo akwe. Me ne nchu ami. Ne ya tuni ma ko me 3 cedi. E ya ko me But maje. Chafe. Come on. Banku. I come 2 cedi.
First, come me 50 pesos.
Okay, first, maybe.
Less than 1 year, you come 50 pesos. About 70 pesos. Neighbor 1 cedi. Be an 3 cedi. Mean for enough 10 years. Before the 13th, before the 25th of January 2013. Enough 10 years. And you come 3. Can I want 2 cedi? 3 cedi for the chair. A papa. We can't come 3. Can any quiet? Can 20 Ghana quiet come 3. There won't be like a new 1 year. That's unmagited. 1 P.
For kenke sellers here at Jamestown, they will increase their prices in the coming week or next 2 weeks. Reporting from Jamestown in Accra, my name is Akosia Otri.
So kenke is also giving problems, right? So these are to just give you a sense of what's going on now. Apart from kenke, another major staple is bread. And a week and a half ago, our team was in the Ashanti region. Bakers in the region were not very happy. I will show you some footages from Kumasi, but I was privileged to speak to one of the high-end bread sellers in Accra In fact, he has outlets in 8 parts of the country, 8 regions, I believe. Mr. Wanompe, he gave me an interview on radio explaining the drivers of the increase in the price of bread. So apparently, flour, margarine, and sugar, which are the raw materials for bread production, have gone through the roof. And Mr. Wanompe explained to me what was behind these increases and why bread sellers were agitating to increase their prices.
A couple of points. First, there was a list of cost of bread in African countries, and I think Ghana was number 3 after Nigeria and I forget the other country. Are you surprised about that? That we have the 3rd most expensive bread in Africa from the list I read.
That's very true.
And what is causing that?
Well, it is the price of the inputs. I was monitoring your discussion, and then if I'm not over exaggerating, the percentage increase that you mentioned were really very conservative. It is even far more than that, and it's becoming very difficult for us bread producers, especially those of us who have a model that is really very innovative, that is very alien to this environment. Bread Boutique basically produces bread for a niche market, people like your good self who are careful where they eat from. And so we have no choice but to ensure that the standards that we set for ourselves are maintained, irrespective of the issues that are.
So you're saying that the 30% increase in flour between September and March, 33% increase in margarine, 45% increase in sugar is probably even higher.
It's far higher. Let me give you an example. The last time I increased price of bread was about 6 months ago, or less than 6 months ago. At that time, flour, if I can remember very well, was less than 200 Ghana cedis, little bit below 200 Ghana cedis. That was, but today, we are getting flour. If you go to Irani, if I'm not mistaken, I think the last flour we bought that was last week, 340 Ghana cedis. So from somewhere 200 Ghana to 340 Ghana cedis, that's more than 30%. You understand?
Mm.
Sugar that we're buying less than 200 Ghana cedis is now 400 Ghana cedis. So that is why I say that those prices are really very moderate and they are very competitive.
Now, the flour you use for your bread, you get it from Irani brothers. So this is
Irani,
wheat.
and then we use Irani and Takradi flour.
So this is wheat flour.
Wheat, yes, exactly.
Have you tried using other types of flour which are locally produced? Would that have brought your cost down?
There's no flour locally produced. They are all produced locally. But what I mean is that, I don't know whether you're talking
No, so you mean the raw, of course, they get the wheat, they import the wheat before they produce them. So that's my point. Like if somebody had maize or other things, like I'm sure there's even cassava kind of things.
Oh, okay, I got what you're saying. So you know, we don't do that. We don't use that. Our recipe is so complex that once you tweak it a bit, consumers like your good self will begin to complain. So we've started this for the past almost 9 years now. We wish we could.
Yeah, but strategically, based on where, like for example, wheat is produced in Ukraine. So as a country, yes, we can say we like the bread you do, but we also want our kids to have bread for the next 20 years, and we also want to create jobs. Don't you think that we should start having a conversation about using local alternatives to the raw material used in producing flour? So, for example, when COVID came, a lot of things were not coming through because of countries stocking up. So in that sense, you are going to have a problem with Irani brothers even getting raw material. But if you had a local alternative, I know some people do potato flour, I know some people do cassava flour. Don't you think that we should start letting Ghanaians also get used to local alternatives so that when problems like what we've discussed emerge, our businesses will not collapse?
You are very right. Very, very right. But you see, just like we have in this country where people are fixated in favor of foreign or imported product. We're having the same problem. I remember when we started bread boutique, we started doing this what's the name? Soya bread. It didn't last. Sometimes we produce and it doesn't go. Everybody wants tuna bread. Everybody wants chocolate bread. Everybody wants milk bread. So the soya bread just end up getting rotten on the shelves. And so we realized that, well, that is our lot. So we just have to play it the way they want it. But that notwithstanding, we are thinking seriously of going to some, some relationship with those who produce soya, and then of course the potato. But that is a long-term project, because if we stop producing what we produce today, we'll be out of the market. We'll have to introduce that slowly. It is dangerous. Sometimes I get scared. I get so scared that, what happens if tomorrow we don't have the material? For example, when during COVID, we import some of our products, our input from Nigeria, and we could not import because the ports, the airports were not working. And we decided to use the local. It was terrible. In source, then we got people refuse to understand.
So people are used to wheat.
Exactly.
A certain type of wheat flour for their bread, and they will not compromise.
Exactly.
So clearly, bread has not been spared. And this is not just Ghana. Indeed, I showed a chart, if I have it, I'll show it to you, of the countries in Africa with the highest cost of bread. It will shock you. Ghana was the second. So in that ranking of cost of bread, I think with the exception of South Africa also, Ghana had the highest price of bread. This was March 2022. This was something compiled by Business Inside Africa. There were 9 countries with excessive cost of bread, and Ghana was around 80 cents per half a loaf. As they say, half a loaf is better than none. So bread prices are also going up. But are these just Ghana-specific problems or not? Let's deal with the global situation. So the World Food Programme itself has opined that we are facing a very difficult situation. Here's a story they wrote just a few days ago, April 19. No rain and no resources. Millions of families across the Horn of Africa pushed closer to catastrophe's day. Now, it gives a very panoramic situation of the matter. I'm not going to read the full story, but what I noticed in this story is that we know from past experience that droughts and local issues have affected food availability and food prices. But on paragraph 4, it says, the situation has been compounded by the fallout of conflict in Ukraine, with the cost of food and fuel soaring to unprecedented highs. Then it talks about drought-affected countries in the Horn of Africa being the hardest hit. And then it gives you different areas in which food prices have gone up. So globally, WFP, indeed, prior to 2022, in 2021, this same WFP had predicted that the COVID crisis was threatening to become a food crisis, and that we were going to have famines of biblical time proportions. So apart from this latest analysis they did a few days ago, a year ago, they had predicted that globally we're going to face severe food crisis of biblical proportions. That is serious. So it's not just a Ghana situation. So it's a global situation. But is it fair to attribute the recent increases in food prices in Ghana to Ukraine? Globally, you can say yes. Now, the Russian embassy itself in Ghana released a 9-part statement on social media last week saying that it is unfair to blame Russia and their invasion of Ukraine for recent increases in food prices. According to them, they've been in Ukraine for only 2 months, and that some of the things happening in terms of world trade wars between US and China, production reductions occasioned by COVID, have affected food availability. And it's patently unfair, according to the Russians, to blame them for the recent food crisis. But that's what Russia is saying, right? But how important is Russia and Ukraine? Look at it. In terms of corn, food items and countries exposed to supply shocks All right? Look at it. 14 countries, or the percentage of the production in the world that is affected by Russian and Ukrainian production. Sunflower oil and seed on your far right, over half of the world's production is from those two countries. 27% of the world's wheat production is from those two countries. 23% of barley from those two countries. 16% of colza seed and 14% of corn. So these are high figures, right? Particularly sunflower oil, which is an important component of a lot of things we do. Then the next chart will now show us countries that are most exposed to what happens in Russia and Ukraine. Turkey is number 1. China is number 2. No wonder China's position on the conflict has been interesting. Egypt is number 3. If you look at those countries, Ghana is not really part. So some can argue that to blame the Ukraine conflict for things like bread price soaring may not be entirely fair, although we do import quite a bit of our flour from those countries, wheat, which is the raw material for flour. But there's another catch which I'll explain later. It's not just a question of direct importation of food. It's also a question of direct importation of raw materials which go into some food, like sunflower oil that we use in certain things, and also the raw material for fertilizer production, which I'll come to later. So our exposure to Ukraine and Russia may not be direct for specific food items, but it's very important. But check it out. Here are some of the countries affected strongly by the conflict. So you see them there. Spain, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Pakistan, and all of this. They call them food frontliners. Share of total imports of selected commodities from these two countries. So Turkey, 22% of their imports from Russia, 3% from Ukraine. China, 5.6, Russia, 17.4, Ukraine, and it goes on and on and on. So those are the global issues around food production. There's also increase in cost of freight. We've seen this globally. And this started prior to 2022, where after COVID, cost of freight, which is really the cost at which you transport commodities on our high seas, went through the roof, affecting a lot of things. One of the backgrounds to the whole conversation about the very controversial benchmark values. So cost of freight have also gone up. Supply chains, most of the things we produce, finished products, there's a global supply chain. It's not just produced in one country. Even a bar of chocolate, there are so many ingredients from different parts of the world that have to be assembled together. So transportation and logistics are an important component of food prices. So there again, it's not just the availability of food, but also the cost of transportation being a major driver of prices. So far, we've laid a foundation. We've shown you that in some aspects of our country, food prices are going up. And we've also shown you some of the commodities that have been affected. But is Ghana an island, or are we suffering from an Africa-wide problem? I'll take a short break. When I come back, I'll show you the precariousness of the situation in other African countries. On a regional level, almost all parts of Africa are suffering. Then we'll come to Ghana and explain some of the local dynamics, and hopefully we'll paint a picture for the way forward. Stay with us. Welcome to The Point of View. Tonight's an editorial on global food prices, African food prices, Ghana food prices. We're trying to explain some of the trends behind those numbers and paint a picture of what this means for your pocket. Now, we've spoken about local food prices briefly. We've also shown you some of the global issues. Now, Africa is an interesting place. So there's this report called the Global Info Security on Food, or Global Info Food Security Report, which shows many countries and many sub-regions and how they are exposed to food prices. It's called the GIEWS Crop Prospects and Food Situation. It's a very mixed picture it presents for Africa. So for example, West Africa, even though in 2021 we produced higher than our previous average, prices of our grains had been going up quite significantly. Now, the report itself essentially says that the aggregate cereal harvests in many parts of Africa fell, largely owing to the negative effects of adverse weather and conflicts. In West Africa, although sub-regional cereal production remained above average, it declined in 2021 due to erratic weather. This report is important because it predicts what will happen in 2022. So, for example, it said that in West Africa, places like Niger will face conflict and as a result, shortfall in cereal production. Nigeria, conflict in North Nigeria would lead to localized shortfalls in cereal production. In Burkina Faso, the northeastern part of the country suffered from a shortfall in cereal production also because of conflict. In Liberia, in fact, in Mali, because of civil insecurity, a lot of people will be hungry, according to this report. In Guinea as well, there's going to be reduced incomes as there will be high food prices and economic downturn in Liberia affecting food production. All these are West Africa issues. There's also localized shortfalls in cereal production in Senegal and high food prices in Sierra Leone. So the West Africa picture was not that great. Although if you look on the previous slide, if you look at cereal production, West Africa comfortably is the highest, followed by East Africa, then Southern Africa has overtaken North Africa, although they interchange. Central Africa is woefully low. If you look on the bottom of the screen. So West Africa is the leader in Africa in cereals. We're talking about rice, we're talking about maize, millet and all these grains, followed by East, before North and South, and then Central. So West Africa has challenges. What about East Africa? East Africa's challenges are even more severe because apart from what happened with COVID-19, there were severe droughts in Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia. There's already conflict in Ethiopia. We know the Tigray region. Somalia is eternally at war. Cereal production declined in East Africa as well. So even before the COVID conflict, even before the Ukraine-Russia conflict, it was predicted that 2022 was going to be a difficult year. So look at that. Cereal production in East Africa declined due to erratic rains. So they also depend on the rains. There was a severe drought in a number of countries. So when we come to East Africa, Uganda had extreme weather. There was localized shortage in Tanzania. Drought conditions plus civil insecurity, we know is the case in Somalia. Kenya had a major drought. About 3.1 million people were estimated to be severely food insecure in Kenya. Eritrea, Djibouti had floods and reduced income. South Sudan, floods, civil insecurity, Janjaweed and all of that. So East Africa had a challenge. So in fact, the report says there were multiple shocks in East Africa, which drove up the number of people who were food insecure. So East Africa had a major problem. But is East Africa the only place? No. Southern Africa, we are talking places like Zimbabwe and Zambia, they had a lot of challenges. So in places like Lesotho, there was a major economic downturn. In Eswatini, there was an economic downturn. In Malawi, now there were poor early seasonal rains and extreme weather for cereal production in many parts of Southern Africa. All right, so it led to declines in food production for 2021. And the only good news in Southern Africa was that they had large stocks to partly cushion production shortfalls. And stock simply means how much of food harvest you've kept for a rainy day. But almost all countries in Southern Africa had challenges. Zambia, localized shortfalls in cereal production. Namibia, localized shortfalls in staple food production and economic downturn. Mozambique, they had extreme weather events, flooding and drought of crazy proportions. Localized shortfalls in food production in Mozambique as well. Even Madagascar was not spared. Madagascar had extreme weather events, 1.64 million people food insecure, cyclones and tropical storms. All kinds of things happened in Southern Africa, affecting their food production as well. What about North Africa? They started well in 2021 with their cereal production, but even they were not spared. There were droughts in the western parts of North Africa. We're talking Western Sahara. We're talking parts of Morocco and Algeria. All right. So North Africa had challenges. Look at Libya. There was civil strife. The whole country, we don't know who's running the place. Mauritania had shortfalls in food production, leading to reduced incomes. Sudan, which is in the north, next to Egypt, for the purpose of this, they had conflict and civil insecurity. So the production outlook for Africa was really bad. In fact, the report identified 33 African countries facing exceptional shortage in food production and supplies. As for Central Africa, the least said about it, the better. They are the least producers of food in the sub-region or in the continent. Burundi had weather extremes. About 1 million people were estimated to be severely affected. This is Central Africa now. Chad had civil insecurity. Idris Deby, we know what happened to him. Shortfalls in cereal production. And according to the CH's analysis, almost 1 million people were going to be hungry in Chad. Cameroon, major civil insecurity between the English and the French-speaking side. Congo had refugees and influx from all over the place. DRC as well had challenges. So Central Africa was a very poor example of production. So all of this meant that the total output of major food items on the African continent, the prognosis was very negative for 2022. But let's come back to Ghana and look at some of the key figures. Our food prices have been going up severely. Let me just read a quick story from the Statistical Service. Statistical Service released the latest inflation figures. And this is the highest inflation we've had since August 2019. Our inflation is 20.4, driven largely by food. The three main drivers of inflation in Ghana, according to this story that Netele Nete wrote, three major drivers. Transportation, which is largely a fuel phenomenon, over 27%. Food was the second largest driver of inflation in Ghana. And then housing. So these are the three bad things. Transportation, which includes fuel, food, which I'll come to shortly, and then housing. These are the three major drivers of inflation in Ghana. Now, look at the food prices and how they've increased. In the latest inflation basket, oil and fat rose by almost 30% in the latest figure they gave us. Water, 27%. Cereals, rice, maize, millet, 25% increase. Vegetables, tomatoes, lettuce, cabbage, carrot, 23.8%. This is serious. Fish, 23.7% food inflation. Inflation on fish. Food price increase in the latest basket released by the Statistical Service. Fruits and nuts, 22.1%. Soft drinks, 20.5%. Now this one is going to affect Salah. Live animals and meat, 20.2%. All these are the individual drivers of food inflation. So all the major food items have gone up in Ghana, right? In fact, the Economy Times of today, which is Monday, April 25, look at that. Food crisis looming. World Bank warns amid Ghana's rising food inflation. And the story is by Adnan Adams Mohammed. He's listed all the various food items and how the prices are behaving. So it's a serious situation we're in. And as I read, almost every major food item has been affected. So we know the Ghana situation. But if globally food prices are rising, why should we be so concerned in Ghana? It's a global thing, right? Everybody is suffering. Why should we be different? True, if you look at the countries which are most vulnerable to hunger, the 33 African countries, Ghana was not part. So Ghana is much, much better. The PFG has worked in some areas. But there's a reason why we should be concerned. And that reason is a very simple reason. Let's come to Ghana and let me show you a few things on Ghana. So if you take the country, the major problem is what we call the low availability and higher price of fertilizer. That's the major issue in Ghana, right? Now, we started seeing an increase in fertilizer usage. 2016, we had 239,000 metric tons. This rose to 440 in 2017. By 2018, fertilizer production and fertilizer consumption had dropped to 310 and then went back up to 613. So fertilizer consumption sort of vacillates. But there's a direct relationship between fertilizer application in Ghana and food production. There's a direct relationship between fertilizer application and food production. So if you look at fertilizer availability trends, in the years that fertilizer was administered in large quantities, you also had good output of things like maize, rice. So the PFG, which was essentially to supply inputs, did positively influence the output of some of our cereals. So maize went up. You had rice production also responding nicely, sorghum, and most of the cereals, when you increase fertilizer application, output is high. But this is the problem. Look at the fertilizer consumption trends. From a high of over 500,000 metric tons in 2020, in 2021, it came down to 250,000 tons. As I speak to you in 2022, fertilizer consumption or availability and usage is around 200,000. What does it mean? If there's a direct correlation between availability and affordability and usage of fertilizer and food, particularly cereal production, this downward trend in fertilizer consumption does not bode well for our food production. In addition to that, look at the price of fertilizer. What is causing the problem is the price. Now check out the price behavior of fertilizer. It's going up. Incredibly increasing. Very, very troubling indeed. There you have it. 2020 fertilizer was around 250 cedis per metric ton. 2021 Q1 around 500, stable to Q2. Look at Q3. Fertilizer is around 500, so it's not too bad. Fourth quarter of last year, fertilizer around 600. Look at where fertilizer is. It's gone over 1,000. So you see the inverse relationship. As the fertilizer price goes up, fertilizer availability comes down. As fertilizer availability comes down, food production comes down, particularly the cereals that PFJ targeted. What does this mean? If the price of fertilizer keeps going up and the availability of fertilizer keeps coming down, food production is going to suffer severely. I'm going to repeat this point. If the chart I just showed you, if the trend continues, fertilizer price, look at where it got to, over almost 1,250 Ghana cedis per ton. And the availability of fertilizer, why? Because the major input for the fertilizer we produce, NPK, one of the key components of that is produced in Ukraine and Russia. The other issue is that a lot of the fertilizer suppliers for the Planting for Food and Jobs have not been paid. So once they've not been paid, it suggests they don't have money to bring more fertilizer. So in the absence of fertilizer, food production is going to suffer. All right. Now let's look critically at this fertilizer situation. What this means for us is that farmers cannot afford to buy enough quantities of things like seed. Apart from fertilizer, the price of seed is going up. The price of weedicides and insecticides is going up. So the major inputs that farmers need, they don't have enough fertilizer. The price of fertilizer is too high. Seed prices are going up. Input prices, weedicides, pesticides going up. Mechanization, tractors, combine harvesters, all the things they use, prices have gone up. So it makes it difficult for the farmer to produce profitably. We haven't even spoken about transportation costs. We are just talking about inputs, all right? Input costs have gone up. Crop protection has gone up. Mechanization has gone up. Transport fares have gone up, driven by fuel prices, right? So fertilizer, seed, inputs, mechanization, transport, all of that not boding well for the Ghanaian farmer. Then in addition to that, Outgrower schemes are going to reduce. Obviously, a lot of our farmers are smallholder farmers. In fact, some market intelligence we've done suggests that support for outgrower schemes will reduce to anywhere between 70 and 80%. That is a big situation. What does this mean for consumers? Already, a 50-kilogram bag of maize, which sold 100 cedis in December, is now selling at 165. Who knows where it will end at? This is maize. 5-kilogram bag of rice, 40 cedis, now 65. 50-kilogram bag of soya, 140 in December, is now selling at 230. And then consumers are having to spend more on the same quantity of food. The sharp increase in the past 4 months is going to have a toll. Now, we've already had large firms like Wilmar expressing their frustration about the current situation. Processing firms are dealing with high cost of raw materials and unavailability of inputs. This trend, if allowed to continue, will affect growth, jobs, and Ghana's GDP, and mean that we are going to depend a lot more on imported food. So the situation doesn't look good. All of this driven by fertilizer availability, fertilizer price, input availability, pest control availability, and all the other things that affect production. So Ghana's peculiarity is in the fertilizer situation, which is the driver of a lot of this. So it looks very gloomy. Now, we spent, since 2017, close to 4 billion on planting for food and jobs. When we come back, we'll examine quickly some of government's policies in agriculture, why some are working, why some are not working. And then we have a few humble suggestions for all of us as to what to do. So by August, prices will start coming down. Stay with us.
You own a business or a site.
Welcome back to The Point of View. Tonight is a conversation about food prices. We've established a few points. In Ghana, food prices are rising at unprecedented levels. But this is not unique to Ghana. It's an Africa situation. Second point, the challenges with production on the African continent were predicted by the World Food Programme, partly due to COVID, some of it due to security issues. For example, in Ghana, part of our food inflation has been driven by imports from Sahelian countries where, because of conflict and adverse weather, they've had to import food from Ghana. So that's another issue. Then we've also dealt with the specific issues with Ghana. We don't have enough fertilizer. We've not paid our fertilizer suppliers. And because fertilizer is directly proportional to production, that plus cost of inputs is going to lead to a dire production situation. We are in the planting season. If something is not done drastically this month of April for fertilizer suppliers, for farmers to have access to fertilizer and inputs and seed, the harvest period in August, where usually prices come down, will not work. So we have a lot of work to do now. What has government tried to do? Well, I group government solutions to about 5. So planting for food and jobs. Clearly, in years that they've provided the inputs, production has gone up, as the previous charts have shown indicate. So PFJ was not bad. One project that a lot of people are still concerned about was One Village, One Dam. It appears it was marketed higher than it actually produced. Although the major Pualugu irrigation project and the Tono irrigation project, when they are done, could properly affect agricultural productivity. The 1V1D doesn't seem to have really benefited. Some people say it's because it was not really under Agric Ministry. I'm not sure. It was under a different ministry. And these were smaller dugouts, not proper dams. So maybe our expectations were too high. But we spent over 4 billion on PFJ over the past 4 years. That should lead to better food security, which is our argument. We haven't seen that. One district, one warehouse. Again, you need to get the warehouses ready. It looks like we didn't put the planning in place properly. So in some months, 2018, 2019, when food production was a lot, the warehouse capacity was not there. Minister of Agriculture is now telling us the warehouses are being built. So hopefully in a year or two, we have enough warehouses that when we have another bumper harvest, warehouses will be available to store. They've been doing something called the Gersal project. So a lot of banks don't lend to farmers because they say agric is too risky. Gersal comes in with some sort of guarantee to support the banks to lend to the farmers. It's a very important project which we need a full program to discuss. But I think it's one of the good things the government is doing when it comes to agric. The GESA project is a very good project if properly executed. It will mean access to credit for our farmers will go up. One of the problems with Ghana is that too many of our farmers are smallholder farmers doing a few acres. They are poor farmers. We don't have large mechanized farms. Now, there's a global phenomenon. As countries industrialize, fewer people farm, but they produce more food. So in Ghana, more people farm, but we produce less food. It's an irony. In countries like the US, less than 10% of the population is farming, but they produce enough food to sell to the rest of us. Same with Russia. There are many countries where the fewer people do agriculture, the more food they produce because you mechanize it. We haven't gotten there yet. Now, the government also tried the interest rate policy. We analyzed this previously, that the Bank of Ghana's interest rate policy is really assuming that the inflation we face is a demand-side inflation. But the inflation we face is supply-side shock induced. So basically we are saying, yes, you can raise interest rates to try and control inflation. It will not work fully. So even though the governor raised the interest rate in the previous announcement, it didn't really slow down inflation because he did that increase in March. As we speak, inflation in March rose from 17 to 19. So clearly, our analysis on radio that interest rate policy cannot tackle the inflation we face is true, because the inflation is a supply-side induced inflation. It's inflation, what we call cost-push inflation, not demand-pull inflation. And so even though interest rate policy is good to mop up excess liquidity, the problem with inflation in Ghana is not excess money chasing few goods. It's not enough production. And of course, they've been trying to firm up the currency because a lot of our inputs, sugar, almost all our sugar is imported. Almost all our flour, Takoradi Flour Mills does flour, but we import the wheat for the flour. Margarine, a lot of it is imported. So if bread prices are going up, it's partly because the currency is also deteriorating badly. So government has tried with interest rate policy, which hasn't really worked, but they tried to shore up the currency. And the cedi's fall has slowed down for the past few weeks. We hope it continues. So this is government's summary of what government has tried to do. Some of this has worked, some have not worked. What is our own solution? First thing we say, pay fertilizer companies promptly or find a way to increase fertilizer production domestically. There are two kinds of fertilizer, organic and inorganic. For a lot of the cereals, we need inorganic, NPK. A lot of fertilizer companies have not been paid, they don't have money, and therefore they can't buy fertilizer. And fertilizer prices have gone above 1,000, as I showed in the previous chart. So the government has to urgently address the liquidity issues fertilizer importation companies face. But we realized that depending purely on imports is not a good solution, because Russia and Ukraine have shown us the input for fertilizer imported doesn't help. Develop local fertilizer production capacity. And by that, we are talking about both organic and inorganic. Organic is natural. So animal droppings, human droppings. You can produce that. Accra compost plant. We have a lot of rubbish. Support these companies. There's one at Borteman. Okay, Jekora. Let's have a program that frees us from overdependence on imported fertilizer. That is very important. We must take that seriously. That's what we mean by the second point. Number 3, a lot of the production has inputs, combined harvesters. We don't manufacture them. A lot of the things that we use in agri production is imported. Government has to do something about the duties because there's a push-through effect. If you are importing inputs and the input price is high because your currency is depreciating, if you don't do something about the duties, you're going to face problems because it's going to lead to inflation. So government has to do something about import use of agri things, combined harvesters, harrows, and all these things. Key point, support large-scale commercial agriculture. Yes, we can use cutlass and hoe, but we read about that in agri science in class 5. Seriously. No, we need to support large-scale agriculture. All right, it's good to share inputs to small farmers, but we need to learn to get them to do cooperatives so they can work under large outgrower schemes. We need to increase our capacity in production. We've already mentioned agri financing. GESA is a very important thing that has to be supported. And then finally, the buffer stock company. Look, India has over 73 million metric tons of wheat and rice in stock. There was an analysis recently that if prices keep going up, India may be the next giant to feed the world. What does our buffer stock company have? What does our buffer stock company have? That's the question. What tonnage of rice, what tonnage of maize, what tonnage of sorghum does the buffer stock company have? That if, as we speak, countries like Indonesia say they won't export certain oils again. If, touch wood, COVID in China becomes a worse situation and everybody stops exporting food, will we have enough food to eat in Ghana? Well, if you look at current levels of fertilizer supply, I don't think so. We have to revamp the buffer stock company. These are not intractable things, but they are doable. We need commitment. Less of the rhetoric. Let's get down to work. We will use media to support good agriculture and also eating what we grow and growing what we eat. But the government needs to put its money where its mouth is if we are to forestall a looming food disaster. Those are our thoughts for tonight on The Point of View. It's been a food conversation. Hope you've learned something new. Buy local, eat local, and store food. Hopefully, things will get better before the year ends. My name is Ben Alabde. Thanks for watching tonight's edition of The Point of View. Coming up next is the Business Dashboard. Stay with us.